a doctor in the house. My golly. Where are you, Doc? You disappeared on me. Right there. And one with integrity. It was really informative. Appreciate that. And that's what we want from our legislators, right? Our leaders. Keep us informed so we can vote and support them. I couldn't have done better on that intro. Richard has a great way of taking a person in the raw, polishing them up, and then saying, go forward and say something, and setting you up correctly. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to, I have an opportunity here, make you aware, scared, or shocked. All three of them will probably come to you in some form or another, and maybe down the road. But what you're going to learn now is something very simple, so neglected, and so dangerously real right now. I've got a packet for you. You should have a series of maps we're going to go through in one handout. And then there is an informative sheet. It's about jihad, and from every angle that you can take the subject itself, which is holy war or internal struggle, which is the duty of the Muslim every day, 7 days a week. I'm going to, you won't go through all this, you can take it home, but I'm going to highlight some areas for you, and then there's an update on one of the sheets in that informative package, and that's something that I happen to know and discovered was missing. But I want you to understand this. All of this began for me in 1984 at Fort Knox when we were securing the Arab world from Soviet domination as part of our Cold War strategy. Now, Tony's here, Chris is here, y'all know what I'm talking about, ain't that the truth? It's not told to the American public, but that's what we were doing. And in all kinds of military installations, we were training military officers from Muslim countries, and they were getting our equipment. So my responsibility as an army officer was to train Muslim officers in our equipment, teasing them away from the Soviet sphere of influence. In fact, the Soviets are atheists, and they were wanting to get rid of those people because they were pretty arrogant. That was told me by Egyptian officers in particular. When my Egyptian friends left, including one of the top gunnery instructors from the Armored Division, that if you've seen the uprising a couple of years ago, the Arab Spring, did you not see those M1 tanks? Well, back then they were M68 3 Series tanks, the kind I was trained on. I was later trained on M1. But that is a result of this relationship. Okay? So you can see our equipment there, and the Soviets are gone. You can see now the Soviets are coming back, or the Russians are coming back now under Putin, and our entire strategy overseas is just falling apart right in front of us. Just ask those Marines at the Yemenis fortified, impregnable embassy. Okay? It's all falling apart, and there's a reason why. We're going to make sense of it. First off, let me tell you a quote that has stayed with me all of those years since 1984. When my Egyptian officers in particular, we had Saudis, we had United Arab Emirates, Jordanians, you name it. But these 25 of them, a couple of lieutenant colonels, the rest were captains and one major. This captain, who was the gunnery instructor for, and I was the American instructor in gunnery theory. We're trying to teach them how our stuff works. They're all going to go through a heavy gunnery course, plus be involved in what's called the officer basic course, armor, 20 weeks. This guy was sharp. These were sharp people. He says, as they're going back to Egypt, after so many months, total almost a year, back to Egypt, they gather around me in our Class A uniforms, and I get the kiss on both cheeks, all that. I was close to them. They nicknamed me Captain Lawrence. Because back then I really had blonde hair, blue eyes, was in shape, didn't wear glasses. And I was close to them. They called me Captain Lawrence. This is a quote. They call me Captain Lima formally when this happened. Captain Lima, we love you as a brother. We do not know what future Allah will bring. But if we see you on the battlefield, yell, Lima, Lima, Lima. There's something about the number 3. We will push you aside and kill all others around you. Inshallah. That's jihad. I went to see the Lieutenant Governor, Ron Ramsey, with Colonel Harding, 14th highest living decorated military person in this country, fighter pilot, Vietnam, full colonel, Ohio State football player, all that. Colonel Harding and another man arranged a meeting for 45 minutes. Presented what I'm giving you. The same thing I had to do in 45 minutes. There's 2 things that came out of that meeting with our Lieutenant Governor, Ron Ramsey. I'm afraid for my grandchildren's future. I said, you be afraid now, sir. 2 months after that meeting, several marches ago, the Governor Haslam announces a Sharia advisor on finance, economics. I hope that piece of paper I gave you is enough information, but there are a lot of references there, so you can even look up what Sharia is. But this is what is most important to know, is that there are enough of us retired military officers that know what this game is, and we have literally reported on it. We used to have to report the NSA. Have battalion commander, colonel, and schoolhouse full, and I said, I don't know anything about what you're doing, Captain Lima, because I've been told I don't want to know. And yes, we're gathering intel. Let me read you a little bit of something what I gave to Lieutenant Governor. This Saudi colonel, captain, gave me the blueprint of jihad. And I say in this paper that I gave Lieutenant Governor, in all my experiences with different Muslim officers, 1984, 1988, 1990, one common theme always emerged. The one Saudi captain explained to me over a period of discussion the only possible reason why a reign of terror exists increasingly today. Now this is 1984. Where are we now? Since 1993. The towers. 2001, the towers. It was their strong belief in solidarity against Israel. Every officer I talked to, Egyptians, there's no geopolitical boundaries when it comes to jihad. He told me in 1984 that jihad is necessary according to Islamic law and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad. It must happen every 100 years and has occurred the entire length of the history of Islam since Muhammad. It happened in Muhammad. There are 2 periods of Muhammad. Muhammad is the one that has the visions in the desert. You know, Jesus goes into the wilderness 40 days. Okay. In the desert. Comes back and his faith grows. I've talked to Allah, the only God. The finisher of all. Including what the prophet Jesus said. Jesus is mentioned in the Quran, and so is Mary, the only woman, by the way. But it wasn't progressing fast enough. So Muhammad has another experience, and it must be by the sword now. And that's how come Islam has got to its credit. Tens and tens of millions of lives lost. Remember Barack Obama said what? Trying to relate back to the Crusades. The Crusades was in the thousands, and as far as killing goes, the Crusades was a defensive operation against Islam in the majority. And not only that, during the Spanish Inquisition, 2,300 people died in 420 years. How is there a comparison? There isn't. So here, this is what makes it interesting. We are in an Arab calendar. Theirs, 1,400 years. When this Saudi captain gave me the blueprint for jihad, he said, this is 1404. Now get this. Never in the history of jihad has there been in Israel jihad every 100 years. In the first third of their 100 years. Now remember, a century, we say 20th century, we really mean the 1900s, so 15th century. Remember this, the first third jihad must be completed. Jihad is three things. It's the rededication of you, a Muslim, to your faith. The second is, it is a conversion to Islam. The third is cleansing all Islamic soul of the infidel. That's you. That's me. And now we have a Jewish state. What is jihad? According to Saudi captain, it is the rededication. I just told you. In fact, while engaged in combat, I've actually seen film footage. I don't know if, Tony, you've seen it directly, but I've seen film footage of an actual attack of a Soviet little outpost fire base. I kind of know what one of those looks like. You're real alone, right, Tony? You're alone. And as they go into action, there's somebody always praying, and they're blessing the mortar rounds, and they're blessing their fire into their target. They are now involved in what's called, it's like Holy Communion, almost to the level the Catholic Church practices it. They're going through a change. And in that moment, they are now in harmony with God, with Allah. So killing in the name of Allah is a beautiful thing, and it is a sacrament. There are no geopolitical boundaries I mentioned earlier. I said, what about the royal family in Saudi Arabia? He said, Captain Lima, remember this. Even the moderate Muslims will be unmolested until jihad is in full bloom. We will not go through finish the first third of our century or our 100 years without that completed. And they too will be put to the sword. That connects the dots, explains why the Saudis buying these people off. Okay? It's a very powerful religion. It's a very powerful spiritual thing. I mean, those of us that have been in more elite military units, just ask Tony, he's been Special Forces. Those of us that have been in hard, tough units, there's a certain bond and there is a certain affinity towards the act, because it's almost like, wow, this is the most beautiful thing, and when I'm defending my country. In their way, they are defending the name of Allah. No, it's not folks being randomly picked in a Jewish deli by two terrorists who weren't Islamic. Now keep this in mind. In the Oval Office sits a man. I've seen his birth certificate, the real one. I have a copy of it years ago. I know where he went to school, and it is connected to a madrasa. And I also know this, because Fox covered it. They zoomed in on his finger. He has a ring that says, "No God but Allah." And there's a thing called fraud. And I'm sure a judge in our back knows that one thing he hates in his courtroom is knowing that he and the jury are being lied to. Because everyone swore on a text. All Muslim clerics are paying attention to jihad. They thought it was Osama bin Laden. The Persians, the Iranians, they're all in disagreement. The Persians are not true Arabs. So what happens is Saudi tells me, and this is years ago, and it's all coming out true today, they're all in competition for who is the baddest, because eventually there is going to be a prophet named, and there's going to be the clerics voting. All geopolitical boundaries are gone. Look at ISIS. Look at Syria. Look at Iraq. It's all happening now. This guy's telling me stuff that I do. I'm trying to connect it all. God, Allah, will bless once it's voted on by all these clerics, all these countries, and they finally say, it is him. It's the Billy Bad of the Islamic world. It is caliphate. Of course, they're wanting to push the end of the world, the more serious Muslim Islamic extremists. Because the Iranian view is that you bring in the 12th Imam and you got it. And they're going to reign the entire world. That's what they want to achieve. And you might say, well, you know, is this real? You know, my dad lived through the Depression and was a teenager when World War II happened. My mother belongs to the German family, was heavily involved in the German military and other things. You hear her today at age 85, and she still can't believe it all happened. Because that's the strange thing about life and people. This is maybe hard to digest. Well, I've been talking about this since 1984, and I'm not the only one. If jihad is to complete its divine course, Israel must be removed. Saying this, wish it was recorded, if it is. But every success, and even Ralph Briscoe talked about it, but I knew it. Every success in the Arab world that shows a breakdown of our foreign policy, the rewards are going to Sunni Al-Qaeda. The Sunni and the Shia, you can read more about it in your packet. The Sunni and Shia are in competition. They're always been in competition for that great day when jihad completes its full bloom. If you saw Ahmadinejad 2 years ago, right there in front of his podium, he had this beautiful white lily painted on the front of the podium. That's jihad in full bloom. That mosque that went in Murfreesboro, that mosque, they were handing out big lilies. It's real. Look at the map handout that you have real quick. All I want to show you there, we'll spend very little time on it. Every single one of those points on the map is Islamic soil. Those are non-Christian countries. Now, if you darkened in the Muslim countries, it'd be even bigger. Muslims who are all, even the moderates, all realize that eventually they have to participate in jihad by supporting it one way or another. Wherever there's a colony of them, or in France we now hear them as the no-go zones. Okay? You try to go into Dearborn, Michigan right now and see what happens. Right now. See what happens to you. Wherever they are, and they have an established mosque, and they have leadership in all, that is soil of Islam. And the French now have to deal with how many? 751 communities like it. Look at the second page, second map. Interesting how they are so dispersed around the country. These communities, which also have centers of Islamic study. Go to the third map. This will show you percentile. The percentile breakout of all the Muslims currently living in the country. Where they're at. Next map. These are Muslim populations. By percentile, by state. And then the last, which is a bit more accurate than the one that I gave to you. These are significant, or where there's controversy now, or people are standing up to Islamic centers and mosques across the U.S. And notice how Nashville, Tennessee, and Murfreesboro and Shelbyville all show up. It's the awareness of it. So you can keep that in mind. You know what I found in my, how much time I have, Richard? 5 minutes. What I found in my experience over the years, and that's just trying to keep up with it, is I had good relations with Muslim officers. The Egyptians were my favorite. In fact, they told me once, they said, hey, it comes down to it. Two things I thought was kind of, one's funny and one's serious. One was, you remember there was all this stuff in Discovery Channel or whatever years ago about how the aliens came here and even helped the Muslims build, the Egyptians build all those pyramids. Egyptian Major, Muhammad Zaki, a good friend of mine. He says, you think we're not smart enough, Americans? We can't build that ourselves. And now we have the data that says, yeah, they did do it themselves. You know, sometimes ethnocentricity, the idea that we're it and no one else is, can kind of befuddle us. But the other is, he says, always remember this, and that's one hope in the Middle East. The Egyptian army is Egypt. The Egyptian army is Pharaoh's army. And we will never forget that. So Egypt, that's why the Egyptian senior officer finally put the Muslim Brotherhood in jail. And a lot of them. And a lot of them are on death sentence. So even in the Muslim world, there's a fear of this thing called jihad. But what I found so interesting, too, was when I asked this Saudi captain, what about our relationship? My job's to train you. You're getting the best from my country and all that. And Saudi Arabia, you're our best ally. He says, have you ever lied to a dog, Captain Lima? I said, oh, how do you do that? He said, of course, you can lie to a dog, because the dog neither knows the truth nor the lie. So I got the message that I'm a dog. And I looked at him, I get it. And he goes, when jihad is in full bloom, you are my enemy. Is that our best ally we have? What I want to shock you with is not only the map. It's with this in mind. The Muslim Brotherhood is all over the Obama administration right now. Amen. The Muslim Brotherhood, it is outlined for you. Let's turn to it if we can. First off, the definition of jihad on page 1. Look at the bottom sentence for yourself for later, but it kind of gives you an idea there. But I want you to go to page number 2 of the informational handout. Contemporary fundamentalist uses. All those wars that are noted are anti-colonial wars. It's missing one on the bottom, below, the Basmachi movement, 1960-1934. See, we never had relationships with the Muslim world until World War I, really. There were wars, there was attempts to colonialize, right, in the 1800s. But real relationships wasn't until after World War I, when the British in particular and others divided up. And the British had the greatest influence. That's how Jordan happened. That's how Saudi Arabia happened. It's a Western concept. Didn't take into account tribalism. Obama is direct descendant of Sunni tribalism. In the Mau Mau Wars, who remembers the Mau Mau? The Mau Maus. Kenya. Early 1860s. Kenya! That's the one you need to add. The Mau Mau Rebellion, Barack Obama's grandfather was a leader in it. And you might say, well, okay, what else does that mean? Well, what it means is that Sunni involvement in the Mau Mau Rebellion is the first time where you really feel the communists, the Soviets, getting involved in African politics to that degree. And that can explain why there is such a strong Marxist, black liberation theology, and Muslim interconnectivity in politics at the national level now. It is a strange relationship because, as a coalition, it has outcomes for each and everybody. And in this case, between the Muslims, and that's why the Soviet influence. Notice how we are being chased out of everywhere. We're being forced out of everywhere. It's all coming out of one place called the White House in this administration. That's the only place it's coming out of. And yes, sir, I'm an American, and I'm a retired military officer, and my requirement is to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, and I'm not going to stand and let a lie continue to perpetuate itself. The whole degradation of our influence in the Middle East is part of the anti-colonial nature of the man in the White House who has that ring. He has that ring. If I was in a courtroom and I was before our judge, he would expect me to argue with facts. If we're trying to find intent, isn't intent what it's all about? We've got to have a motive. But wait, what is the ultimate intent? What was the reason, the drive? What is it? If you're going to convince an audience, I'm trying to convince a jury here. Are we not in trouble from within? Look at what's happening without. Even the language that comes out is anti-colonial. The first thing that happened, here's shock number 2. When President Obama assumed office on the first day, which is the 20th of January, 2009, he had the bust of Winston Churchill removed and sent back to England. And secondly, his first overseas visit. Talk about being where we might connect the dots in a courtroom. His first overseas visit was in Cairo, and was it to Mubarak? No, it was to the Muslim Brotherhood. Then he went to see Mubarak, knowing very well Mubarak is going to get it. The Islamic Spring, the Arab Spring was toppling these dictators. That's all it was for the Muslim Brotherhood and the Islamists to come in, and where it's the strongest, it's where the Sunnis are. And you might say, well, Gary, are you accusing a conspiracy? I am accusing of something beyond political incompetence. Because it's too clever. Every single bit of it. Things don't work that way in life. I've been in some of the best military operations. Things go wrong. Right, Tony?
That's right.
They go wrong. This stuff works so well that there's got to be a lot of people involved. Benghazi, Colonel Harding, and I will send it to you if you want. Email address me. The articles of impeachment. Colonel Harding and a number of senior officers have been fighting so hard to get to Congress, and they have delivered document after document on Benghazi. Benghazi was a gun-running operation. Sound familiar? Sworn statements. People were involved. Gun-running operation to Sunni Al-Qaeda in Syria. We bringing weapons in. When it went south was because of 2 Navy SEALs who didn't know they weren't supposed to rescue the ambassador and the staff at the embassy several blocks down. They didn't know it. The ambassador was supposed to be captured. There were deals being made with the terrorists. And we're never allowed to use the word Islamic terrorist. Only country in the world. Even the Egyptian general said it was Islamic terrorism. And he demanded that all of the clerics cease and desist, or they're in trouble too. This is real. And it is here. When I was in emergency management, I do remember a briefing we had from Homeland Security. There are plans for the nuke terrorist hit. 250,000 Americans. What if? It's a major, major exercise where thousands of National Guard troops and regular Army, whatever, came right here through Tennessee 2 years ago. They were even told Highway Patrol about it. And converged on a location in central Kentucky. This was the big day after. The day after that movement. We are vulnerable because our own government has now made us vulnerable. And we have people in office that are too politically correct, or there's too much money involved, because these Muslim bigwigs, the ones from Saudi Arabia and elsewhere, are buying them off. They'll do it. They'll buy interest in their companies. You know, it's a lucrative business. Washington, go poor, come out rich. The lobbying is very powerful. And I would say to a degree naive. Because who would believe the story that I just gave you? I thought it was mere rhetoric years ago. But it's unfolding. We have leaders now that have no concept of supporting and defending the Constitution of the United States. One thing, and I'll close with this. As a military officer, and remember this, Chris, you know, way back in our early days, we always knew this, that we would never do anything in our office for personal gain. Unfortunately, that oath, and that's how you do it. When you're not involved for personal gain, but you want to serve the public, guess what? It's so much easier to serve the Constitution, isn't it? And the Constitution is for whom? People. The people. Of, by, for. And Washington right now is a dangerous, dangerous, dangerous centerpiece to our freedom, liberty, one way or another. And crisis after crisis. And this would be the big one if we had a nuke attack, if we had something of that nature. What you see in France going on, that is the beginning. But now understand, and in closing, you heard it from one guy. I'm not the only one. Now what are we going to do? Are we Americans? And are we going to start demanding from our state legislators to look into every business practice in this state? I don't care if they're state legislators or congressmen. What business are they doing with Muslim businesses where the Muslim Brotherhood's connected? What are they doing? And you will see it. You will see it, the Muslim Brotherhood. I don't have time necessarily right now to show it to you. But in one of the highlights is mentioned who the Muslim Brotherhood is. And you will see that they are dedicated. And those are the ones that were in the White House just the other day, the Muslim Brotherhood. They are dedicated to jihad.